Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to have an esteemed panel here this morning with two of my colleagues and friends from the U.S., Richard Friedel of Fox and Anne Schelle of Pearl TV, and my friends from Europe, Vincent Grivet of HBB TV and Oliver Botti of FinCons. So we're going to have a robust conversation about what's happening in the U.S. and a bit in South Korea, perhaps, as well as what's happening here in Europe. So Vincent, HBB TV is progressing here in Europe. Can you give us some sense as to what the current status is, where it's really being activated, and how is it being received by audiences?
I think it's a very, very fascinating moment for the broadcast industry and for HBB TV in Europe those days. I think broadcast has been very quiet if you look the few decades in the back. And maybe some threats started to happen in the market and challenge very strongly the broadcasters. And let us be fair, for many years they did very little. And finally, I think they realized that the world is changing. And the changes of the world doesn't mean that broadcast is dead. On the contrary, I think broadcast TV has a lot to tell to the world and has a lot to bring to the audiences for entertainment, but it needs to change. And the good news for myself, the good news for the broadcast industry and for my HBB TV colleagues is that I believe that really HBB TV is playing a very central role in how broadcast can be reinvented to please the audiences. And the reinvention has maybe, well, it's a complex process with many aspects, but I think I would like maybe to outline three key elements in that reinvention process. The first one is really the combination of legacy linear broadcast TV with on-demand OTT type of services. And I think it's very important because the classical broadcast companies, they have an extremely large and powerful amount of assets for content. And in the past, they would propose those assets only in the linear form, which is not exactly fully meeting the expectation of end users. And now, with HBB TV, they can bring these assets and contents to the audience also in a non-linear OTT style, which is very important. The second aspect, maybe, which is very interesting and maybe more specific to Europe for the time being, is what I would call the platformization of broadcast, where in every major European country, you find a national platform where all main broadcasters get together and bring their content and assets in a unified interface for the consumer. So that's Freeview in the UK, that's Lovers TV in Spain, that's TV in Italy, and that's very soon Salto in France. So that's the second very important aspect. And HBB TV is really the technical engine of those platforms, of course. And the third aspect, which is, I believe, very, very important as part of this broadcast strikes back attitude, is the targeted advertising, the introduction of targeted advertising in linear TV by the broadcaster. So definitely, it's a moment of intense and fascinating activity.
Wonderful. That's great. Well, I think the U.S. is trying to get itself going in the same direction, and a lot of progress on ATSC 3.0. Can you give us an update?
Sure. So I think that was a great introduction of sort of the broadcast industry is very similar in the United States in terms of their need to reinvent themselves and the largely because their viewers are going elsewhere, and they recognized that over 5 or 6 years ago. Pearl Television is 8 of the larger broadcast station groups in the United States, so we cover over 75% of U.S. households. And recognizing that, we started looking at ways to reinvent our transmission platform, which was ideated in the 80s and implemented in the 90s prior to the internet, prior to the iPhone, obviously, prior to cell phones, period. So this brand new standard was developed by multitudes of companies, over 165 companies, including all the broadcaster cable companies, Samsung, LG, your big CE manufacturers, as well as your transmission companies. And it was finalized back in 2017. And at the same time, broadcasters had to petition the FCC the Federal Communications Commission to get the authority to transmit in this new system, because it is not the same as the one we have in place now, and it's not backward compatible. So a unique situation for broadcasters. What's great about this brand new standard is we weren't the first to deploy it. Korea, as you brought up, South Korea actually implemented it over 2 years ago. And you can't buy a television set that's not enabled with ATSC 3.0 in Korea, South Korea today. So it's doing well there. It's great news for us because that provides, we're on the second and third generation chipsets in the U.S. So in terms of where are we with this brand new standard? Well, it is completely different. It's an IP-based over-the-air broadcast standard, which allows for new business models. Richard's going to talk about that. So in terms of deployment, and just to reference what Vincent said about the level of collaboration to bring a singular platform to the consumer over-the-air broadcast services, we're doing the same thing. So we did not get spectrum to do this transition to this brand new platform. So broadcasters are having to collaborate on a market-to-market basis. Every market in the United States being very different of the types of broadcasters, the number of broadcasters that are there carrying different types of content. So we're collaborating to do that. We announced at the NAB show this past April that we will be launching the top 40 markets in the United States. Actually, it's 61. Covering over 74% of U.S. households in 2020 in preparation for the early introduction of television sets. At the same time, we've been working closely, or the NAB has, with CTA to develop conformant programs, a logo. I think you'll be hearing later this month about that.
Cool.
So how does the consumer recognize a television set that has ATSC 3.0 tech inside of it? At the same time, we incubated a model market in Phoenix with Fox, Univision, NBC, PBS, and the Pearl companies, and it's an open test bed where we've been actually working with consumers about their perspective of the new service. What's come back is high interest or willingness to go buy a new television set because it is this hybrid environment. But at the same time, it's bringing high-quality video, high-quality audio, and this ability to receive the enhanced content when you're in a live linear combined with a internet world. And so we're developing what is sort of it's an application framework. We can send an application over the air, and it's also a secure platform, which is something broadcasters haven't had in the U.S. So 2020 is our year. We're hoping to have an early product out there. I think look for a lot of information at CES around this.
So start of a new decade and a new way of television in the U.S.
Yep.
Okay, great. So Oliver,
Yes.
FinCons does a lot of work with broadcasters throughout Europe, helping enable the leveraging of HBB TV capabilities. Can you provide us some commercial examples of how it's being applied and how broadcasters are profiting from this new standard?
Yes, I think, well, we started with HBTV from the research point of view, working with the German players 6-7 years ago. And it was already launched in the previous version 1.5 of the standard, but not yet taken off all over Europe. It was working in Germany, for example. From there, we had, now I think that if I look 6 years back now, the market is much more mature. I think we have I think HBTV is at a mature level of adoption right now. But still, and Vincent mentioned the number also of alliances that have been built national level, at the national level, so like Love TV in Spain, or Freeview in UK, or the TiVo case in Italy, or the Salto in France that we are all waiting for. But also there are some cross-country alliances which are coming back, so this is something new from the business, from the organization point of view, not the technology. Mediaset bought some stakes within ProSieben, but also they created a European group, so that's a sign. But we also, if you look at the telcos, Deutsche Telekom is deploying, actually is rolling out their cloud TV all over Europe, in all the countries out of Germany where they are present with their telecom service, where combined with the TV. But I think there are some broadcasters that are pioneers in this. And for example, we work directly with Mediaset since many years. And they were one together with Rai in Italy, the first to launch in 2016 their first experience of interactive and addressable TV advertising. So they launched a new advertising product, which was called ID Plus. It's still called ID Plus, which is in the pocket of every, starting from 2016, was in the pocket of every commercial guy in Publitalia, which is the sales house. So this means that they changed really their offering to the advertisers. So the advertising package changes significantly, adding to the linear advertising package the online one in a combined hybrid scenario. And when they launched it, and we did for them this launch in last year in June during the FIFA Football World Cup, they launched not only a new OTT, which is called Mediaset Play, but a new hybrid TV. So they combine really the linear TV with the online services. And using the FIFA World Cup was really instrumental to show, for example, during the live of a football match, the possibility to interact with the content, to see highlights produced in real time. So things that are easy on the web, but not that easy on a traditional broadcasting environment. And they were very successful, so that they started evolving this approach and, for example, stimulating the audience and to leverage the interactivity enablements, for example, for interactive contents, and not only for the monetization aspect, which is, of course, the most relevant for the broadcaster, but for the audience, you need to provide value. And so they are still, I said it's a mature stage of adoption, but still there are a lot of trials on the market to test the market and to educate the market to the interactivity tools. So for example, they are creating new formats. So we all know, maybe not all of us like it, but we all know the Celebrity Big Brother as a format, and it become really an interactive one where you can go and see with a multi-camera. You have one broadcasted camera and two alternative cameras through the broadband, and you can pick up your preferred camera. So you want to see the dining room all the time, or you want to follow your character. So that kind of personalization is now possible. So the format itself is changing. There's an opportunity.
What are the statistics in terms of how people are using?
That's absolutely a secret.
Okay.
No, because I'm joking, but of course they are testing the market. So they are educating on one side and collecting feedback to understand what works and what doesn't. And maybe what doesn't work today will work tomorrow. But that's very useful because, of course, there's a tracking behind that of all the actions, GDPR compliant for all of us. But there's an important tracking which allows to know better the audience. From the advertising point of view, to be able to provide targeted advertising and addressable TV advertising, but also from the content point of view, to select the programming. So the programming is being impacted now, will be impacted soon by this monitoring of the audience perception of the programs, which was not the case in the past, was not that easy. I can announce that because I think it was not published, that we launched it last week, the first example in Mediaset and in Italy, and I don't know if in Europe, but of real-time dynamic advertising replacement, which means that the linear advertising is in real time replaced thanks to the adoption of HBTV latest standard 2.0.1, replaced with a one-to-one advertising, which is reaching the television through the broadband. That was launched last week. It's working well. That's subject to test. So there's a lot of tests to see how this is accepted, how this is can be better exploited. And so it's mature, but under trials. And I think it's really a new wave for broadcasters. I mean, it's a tool. It's not not the new life of the television. But the hybrid TV is a good way to react also to the big giants having a pure OTT offer and trying to distinguish and to leverage the strength of the branded TV, the linear traditional brand TV, with the investment on programming, together with the power of the online tools, which is interactivity, which is programmatic approach to advertising distribution. So that's combining into, it's going to be combined into an hybrid scenario that is in the hands of the broadcasters only right now.
And I would imagine too with Italy, as I understand things, there's a set cut on the broadcasting transmission standard in Italy that in 2020 you're going to have to move to DBB T2, which will
Yes, that's another move that is
Yep.
also important, and of course that's a lot of other work there behind that, but it's in favor of these technologies anyway, so it would be easier then to manage
Right.
the model.
it will allow for more broad distribution
Yes,
of the
yes.
standard within the country.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay, fascinating. So Richard, lots of interesting things going on in Italy and Germany and
Yes.
elsewhere. You've been a big fan of ATSC 3.0. How do you see it having real strong commercial applications for a broadcaster like Fox, who does a lot of sports and other things, much like our friends at Mediaset?
We do. First, I have to thank Vincent. I'm going to steal something from you. I love this. Broadcasters strike back. I think it's great. You have to work.
Copyright. No, actually, it's not.
I want to use that. Anyway, yes, because we're in Europe and people may not know, Fox is of course known as Fox Sports and Fox News and the Fox Network, but Fox happens to have one of the larger station groups in the country, at least in terms of audience served. We're in 17 markets with 28 stations, and we service roughly 60% of the population of the United States. So we have a really strong base, which is why ATSC 3.0 is of such interest to us. My compatriots have done a really great job talking about interactivity and hybrid uses, so I don't think I need to repeat that, but we clearly see that. You led with the sports comment, and what more logical thing to do than to present additional information for consumers. And in ATSC 3.0, I'm sorry, I don't know if that's HBBT, but it's a completely seamless integration. We've actually done experiments where you can literally integrate program elements in perfect synchronization. So there are great opportunities for us as creative people, experience it and get to play with it a bit. Anne mentioned we are members of the Phoenix Model Market, which is sort of our test bed, and there are a number of activities going on there. The single most important one, and mention it, but we have content protection in ATSC 3.0, which is going to allow us to obviously monetize content in ways that broadcasters never could. So that's very exciting to us. No announcements there, just sort of an obvious business application for us. We're also very excited about just the fact that we have 25 megabits of distribution to literally 60% of the country, or perhaps by market. And that's just a huge opportunity. People, 5Gs, of course, walk around the show, you see 5G everywhere, and they're talking about how they're going to send data to everything on the planet. Well, we have the ability to do the same thing, and we have a huge advantage. Our cost to do it is significantly less. The mobile industry is going to spend billions trying to replicate 5G coverage across cities, and we're going to put up our one tower, at least to start. More on that in a second, and we can hit those same people. So our cost of delivery is significantly less, and we don't have a business plan that I can announce here today, but you can see the allure of that and the appeal of it. Then on top of that, Anne didn't mention this, but 3.0 is set up for single frequency networks. So we're going to have the ability to then expand the coverage, the signal density really within our cities, and that just gives us more opportunity to then segment that data distribution, at least theoretically. Now that once we get to that point, we have the density in the signals, now we have a mobile capability, a strong mobile capability. And that just leads one to use your imagination. Obviously cars, that's simple. Well, people immediately go, well, we're broadcasters, so that'll be backseat entertainment and things like that. But wait a second, autonomous cars are coming. Cars need data all the time. Well, here's another opportunity for ATSC with our data capacity. And working with Pearl and the Phoenix group, we're actually meeting with auto manufacturers, met with Ford and GM and several European manufacturers as well, and some Korean ones. Work in progress, right? These are early days as we try to figure some of these capabilities out.
Wonderful. That sounds great. So I have a question for all of you. Lots of exciting things being discussed here. 5 years from now, how do you see broadcasting coming together in your region of the world?
I think the challenge, and I think the challenge will be met and achieved. The challenge for the broadcasters is that in 5 years' time, a brand like Freeview in the UK, like Salto in France, or TV in Italy, will be as relevant and as attractive as a modern entertainment proposal as Netflix. And that's going to happen. And that's going to happen because all of these interactive hybrid features that are added, and that is really going to upscale the user experience associated with broadcast to the point that it's not going to be different from the user experience that these giant pure digital companies have created. So I think this is going to be what broadcast will be, and it will be very much like competing alternative entertainment proposals.
What do you think, Oliver?
Yeah, I think that television is getting global. So we have examples here of the television group that now already distributes either in US and in Europe. From the technology point of view, so this requires a global collaboration. From the technology point of view, global collaboration for me means, of course, having the standards, which by now are two different standards. So I don't know, in Athens we will speak about the need of a global standard, but it's just a discussion. I think that technologically we can already solve some of these issues and catch some opportunities. For example, we are already since we are involved both in the ATSC standard body and in the HBBTV, in particular ATSC in the working group on interactivity. We are learning from the two markets, and we have contributed to bring some experiences from the European broadcasters into the US, and now we are bringing back some useful accelerations from ATSC into the HBTV world. Technologically, for example, we understood that there are no tools today that support a global broadcaster like Disney, for example, and Fox, to distribute content either in one and the other standard in a seamless way. So, for example, we are developing, and will be announced in Athens, the HBTV Symposium, a tool which allows to generate, to start from templates, to generate an interactive application, which at the end is an HTML application, but needs to run on the television set and on paired devices, companion devices, which in a push button approach can generate either the ATSC and the HBBTV or the HBBTV standard form.
Wow.
So that's a technological solution, but to enable something that from the business point of view is quite relevant.
What are your thoughts, Richard?
I think the U.S. model will be a bit different. I don't really think we're going to see centralized platforms, much as if you describe in Europe. Just the nature of the country is different. But it is interesting. We mentioned content protection. That's a group of broadcasters who got together to agree, right? And you know, at least in our country, I can't speak to Europe, I'm sorry, broadcasters are really used to competing. They're not really used to working together. And Anne's done a great job of this, where we've been able to get broadcasters to work together. So the content protection is one example. We believe there'll be a common framework for applications, much like you're talking about. But where the real collaboration is starting is we have a spectrum sale that happened, and stations are being repacked, meaning they have to change frequencies in our cities. And as part of that process, people have to sort of work together, right? Because as one guy changes frequency to another channel, those people have to coordinate and couple. And we're trying to use that in conjunction with the rollout of ATSC 3.0, where there will be one or two stations in every market to start. We're having broadcasters work together through that whole process to try to coordinate. So in Fox's case, you know, Ann gave the statistics, but I should have said it earlier. We have announced that we will have 3.0 on in every one of the markets that we broadcast in by the end of 2020 next year. Small project I have in my spare time.
Are you working on developing programming for that as well?
Well, the good or bad news is the United States government has required us to simulcast from our traditional broadcasting to the 3.0 signals. So initially that will be consistent. And to be honest, it is pretty heavy lifting to make all these technological changes. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of original programming to start. The economics aren't there. Obviously, be very few sets in the beginning, but that ultimately is part of a
But some
business plan.
interactivity, I would imagine.
Interactivity,
Yeah.
we will all launch with at least some basic interactivity.
That's great.
So you're going to see broadcasters work together on this framework, as I mentioned, as well as these other things, and we'll see if it can grow to be as broad as it is in Europe. I'm skeptical, but I'm willing to try.
So we're yin and yang here. I'm the optimist.
Always the case.
It's always the case. We work well together. A lot of what Richard says, right, we've got to get the transition right. We've got to get these stations up. But what I'm seeing happening through that effort is this massive collaboration and realization that, our competitors are outside our walls. The other piece to this is our partnership with our cable companies. So we've been working with our cable partners in developing ways to integrate on their IP side. So, we're moving to IP, they're moving to IP. So there's some opportunities there for us to bring some of the enhancements that were developed as part of ATSC into the cable environment. That's a huge percentage of our current viewer base on 1.0. I should mention, nothing's happening to our current customer base. They are, if you want to, it's all voluntary in the United States, so you don't have to go buy a TV set with ATSC 3.0. You don't, it's voluntary for the consumer, it's voluntary for the broadcaster, it's voluntary for the MVPDs or the cable companies to pick up our signal. But I do believe over time, as ATSC becomes ubiquitous in television sets, and I do think that's going to happen, and I think that's going to take about 5 years, then you'll start to see a hockey stick effect where these TV sets are, you can't not go buy one. Today, if you think about Wi-Fi connected TV sets, 7 years ago, there was maybe 1 or 2 models out on the market that were that were interconnected. That had Wi-Fi, and I remember talking about this at a CES show, and people were skeptical. Why would you want Wi-Fi in your TV set? Well, Netflix kind of drove that. I think you're going to see more of that drive. The whole ecosystem, including the Netflix, which is an entertainment company, versus Amazon and Apple and others. We're all pushing the envelope, and I in terms of the viewer experience. But at the end of the day, we provide local content, and that local content is highly valued, and it's very difficult to produce. If I'm sure you've all been to the United States. It's a big country with a lot of unique towns, and it's very different going from New York down to Mississippi. So that's not going to change. And so that production of local content is highly valued. So I think, from my perspective, in 5 years, that's our strength as local broadcasters. And you're going to see more. The other thing I didn't mention is there's more consolidation happening in the United States amongst broadcasters. So there's less broadcasters that have to implement things. So 5 years from now, if we execute on the transition, I do think you're going to start to see scale for ATSC 3.0. You're going to also start to see more spectrum being put to ATSC 3.0 because it's a digital to digital conversion, a lot less expensive. It's not what happened from analog to digital, where the first TV sets were $20,000 back in 1993. To the consumer, they're not going to even see a price differential because they're buying for value. So anyway, I see, if we can execute, I see a lot of promise in ATSC.
The optimist would say when we execute.
Well, right, true. That's true.
The pessimist even agrees with you.
Okay.
But
True.
you can change your.
I always put equipment bidders in there. But watch for 2020. We will execute in 2020.
Yeah.
Okay, we're running out of time, but can I ask one question, Kate? I have one question from. Okay. TV manufacturers around the world will welcome the day where they can make TVs with just an IP connection. How viable is this, and do these standards, the standards that you're talking about, help?
So in Phoenix alone right now, 40% over the air. And of the Hispanic viewers, 60% taking the signal off air. Vizio tried that in the United States, and it lasted for, I don't know, maybe 6 months, 9 months, a year. They now put the tuners back in the television set. So the U.S. market is very much a robust over-the-air market.
And over there is growing.
And it's growing in the U.S.
Yeah, and I would say the same for Europe, where if you think of the big European countries like Germany, UK, Italy, Spain, France, in each of those countries you have between 45 and 65% of people who watch TV through over-the-air TV, and it's not changing. It's been changing in the past, but now it's stabilizing and even regrowing. And there are many reasons for that. It would be take too much time to explain. I think one of the reasons is what Richard mentioned about energy efficiency and the very low cost of broadcast TV. And that's a unique advantage which everybody is rediscovering now.
Yeah, I think also that involving the manufacturer is mandatory. And I think, for example, NAB, we are working with NAB, did a great job and is doing a great job in promoting this through the manufacturer, the takeoff of ATSC. Last NAB, we showcased it with NAB itself, a full stack implementation of ATSC 3.0 in April on the first Samsung prototype, the first LG prototype, the first Sony prototype. Of course, they need to be pushed. We need to give broadcaster and content provider should give them some motivations for that.
Right.
But the standard is helping because it's avoiding that everybody creates its own ad hoc solution for that.
Okay, I have one question that's literally for the Europeans is what's your take on DVB-I or 1?
Yeah,
I guess it's I, yes.
it's an interesting matter, and it seems there is a little bit of confusion whether DVB-I is a kind of successor or alternative to HBBTV, and I think it's absolutely wrong. Maybe one way of presenting that is that the goal of HBBTV is to bring internet type of services in a broadcast environment. So you start from a broadcast environment and people say, well, I'm not entirely happy if I have only broadcast, I need a little bit more. That's HBBTV. DVB-I is the exact opposite. You're talking to people who are in a pure internet environment, and they say, well, it's great because I am an internet guy, I have all the OTT things, that's great, but I still need the broadcast things, and that's where DVB-I comes. So they are absolutely complementary, not at all alternatives or competing.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just say that from the technology point of view, we see this just as an opportunity. It's a matter of integrating those, but the application layer is not impacted by that. So there will be more opportunity to create nice applications based on both standards.
Well, I think there's going to be a lot to look forward to over the next several years, and hopefully we'll be back here next year to talk about how things are evolving. Thank you so much for all your
Nice.
time today. There is one other question here, but I think some of our panelists will be around if you want to ask. There's one other question here. But thank you. Have a great day, and enjoy
Thank
the
you.
rest of your IBC.
Thank you.